All right, welcome back. In this lecture, for this video, we're going to be looking at chapter 12, exploring adulthood further, but specifically looking at body and mind of the extended adulthood, so not just the emerging adulthood in this case. So if you want to follow along, it starts on page 2 or 4, not 2, 419, chapter 12. I saw the 2, my brain transposed. Anyway, 419 for getting started on that if you want to follow along in the chapter. If you want to follow along with the PowerPoint, you can find that in D2L where you found the video. And don't forget to take the quizzes. Listen for the 4 random facts as we go, as always. The quiz for the lecture as well as the quiz for the chapter. And that should be everything in a nutshell, right? Message me as always if you have any questions. But anyway, let's go ahead and get rolling with this. So, adulthood, slide 2. Growing older, part 1. So it covers 4 decades. This is actually going to be the time for most people where you're going to spend most of your life in this stage. If you live to be like 100 and, what would it be, 106, you'd spend more time in old age. But since statistically, not everyone's going to do that, this is going to be a time when the majority of people spend most of their life. So it goes from age approximately 25 to 65. It used to go from age 18 to 65. But they've adjusted it because of the emerging adulthood side of things. Typically, 30 to 65-year-olds feel about 5 to 10 years younger than their chronological age. So if you ask, like, how do you feel? You're like, I feel like I was 30, kind of a thing. Although there are some cases where people feel older than they are due to lifestyle choices or injuries or things like that. Most adults consider themselves strong, capable, and healthy. Again, the majority. Adults aged 26 to 60 contribute more to society than any other age group. This is really the time of productivity. Okay, we've discovered ourselves. Actually, when we even look at Erickson, this is going to be one of the key things of the middle age adulthood is we've discovered ourselves. We're finally kind of finding our place in society, and we want to contribute to society and leave some kind of a legacy behind. And so that's going to be part of this. Okay. All right. Slide 3, growing older, part 2. Senescence is a gradual physical decline during which the body becomes less strong and efficient. So sometime after the age of 25, our body basically begins to slowly degrade, right? We start getting old. And it is a slow process initially. With cell replication and all these different things, it's basically, they're not quite as accurate or quite as well as they used to be because of damage from all kinds of different factors. From spending time in the sun even can actually damage your cells, but also not spending time in the sun can damage your cells. So I mean, it really is it's just inevitable, essentially, that our bodies will start to break down. Now, I have heard some doctors say that with this, it basically means that it's impossible to build bone mass and to build muscle. You could just maintain. But the evidence doesn't seem to show that. I'm not exactly sure why they say that. I've read several different things that have suggested that. But if you just look at strength building research and things like that, you can find situations where guys and people have increased bone mass and increased muscle mass. It just gets more and more difficult to do those kinds of things. Okay, our body basically is wanting to reserve energy during this period, so it starts cutting back if it can, and it's going to be less likely to build it. Right, 20 to 20 or 18 to 25, man, you can pack on muscle, you can get your bones super strong, you can do all these different things. After 25, it starts to get a little harder to do all those things. Not impossible, but a little bit harder. Anyway. Allostatic load is measured by 18 indicators of health and aging. Aging differs some people age 3 years per chronological year. So you might have heard the expression, or like doctors might even say, let's say you've been smoking for 20 years and you're 40 years old, and they look at your lungs and they're like, you've got the lungs of an 80-year-old. In other words, your lungs are functioning at the level of an average 80-year-old if they say that. Okay. And so in some cases that can be due to environmental factors. In other cases that can be just genetic. You just got the bum end of the stick basically genetically. For some people though, they're going to actually basically age slower than their chronological years. So you might have the lungs of a 20-year-old when you're 40 years old if you've been exercising and breathing clean air and all those kinds of things. So there's no real like this is going to be how it is. It's going to differ significantly from person to person, given environmental differences as well as genetic differences, and how those play out in that individual and how they interact with each other and all that. It's very complex. But yeah, so one person's at 40 is going to feel like a 20-year-old, another person might feel like a 60 or 70-year-old. It's not going to be the same experience for everyone. That's another thing you're going to find with this is that it becomes more divergent, right? 0 to 1, there's like set things that need to be happening, and they need to be happening roughly at the same time for everybody. In the next stage, same kind of thing, but there's a little more wiggle room. Next stage, a little more wiggle room, so on and so forth. By adulthood, there is a lot of wiggle room for the personal experiences of each individual. And by our senior years, that diversity it's immense. It's actually one of the more difficult stages to really study, just because of the diversity that has occurred due to everyone's life choices and everything that has occurred in those 60 plus years beforehand. Okay. All right, let's see. So growing older, part 3, slide 4, breathing. Like I keep saying, right? Breathing, exercise, eating well, drinking enough water, and getting enough sleep. Those are going to be the keys. Those are still the keys. Breathing actually becomes even more important though as we move into adulthood. On average, dispersal into the bloodstream from the lungs drops about 4% per decade after age 20. So at age 30, you're getting about 4% less oxygen into your bloodstream as you were compared to age 20. By 40, you lose 4 more percent compared to age 30, and so on and so forth. This is actually part of the reason why even like with COVID and stuff, it actually affects older people more severely generally, is because of the fact that one of the things that COVID affects is your oxygen levels. And so the older you are, you're already struggling a little bit more with oxygen, especially if you're not active. And so therefore that it can affect you more deeply. But all that to say, this is why breathing and intentional breathing, where you're taking in a full lung of air and letting it out, right? You're fully utilizing the lungs, sitting up nice and straight, right? So you can fill them up full. That can be a massive boost to your overall performance in this age. Some adults, especially if they are obese and heavy smokers, might seriously impair their lungs by middle age. Again, you might be 40 years old and have the lungs of an 80-year-old, right? Sleep is increasingly seen as crucial also, getting enough rest. The amount of sleep will typically lower as far as the amount of sleep needed to get that full feeling of rest, right? Adolescents need like 9-10 hours. By adulthood, most adults are needing about 7.5, up to maybe 9 hours, with the average being 7.5 to 8 hours of sleep per night. But making sure that you actually get that sleep is important, right? And oftentimes adults are going to be more likely to attempt to get that sleep compared to when we were younger. So yeah. By the way, if you haven't caught on yet, this is also when things start to get a little bit depressing, because we start to see like you're at this peak point at age 25, and then basically it's just kind of this decline in every way. So be prepared for that. We can reduce the effects of the decline, but the decline is going to happen no matter what. So 5, the brain with age. The brain slows down with age. Bummer, right? You are going to be, again, basically your brain hits peak maturity at age 25. Everything is working, and it also hits peak performance at age 25, or at least potential of performance. You might improve, in fact, in many ways with age, but the potential at 25 is greater than at any other stage in life. Okay. Same with muscle, same with skeleton, same with everything, organs working, all that, right? 18, 25, you're at your peak. So the brain slows down with age. Slower firing neurons and axons pick up, and there's lengthened reaction time. Your reflexes will begin to slow with time. And again, if you exercise and things, work on those keeping those kind of explosive muscles intact. I can't remember if they're the short strand or the long strand, but anyway, keeping them going, right? Doing things like explosive exercises, like lifting somewhat heavy but hard and fast, jumping and sprints and things like that can increase or maintain at least your your reaction times if that's something that's important to you. And then even things like Sudoku and word puzzles and things can also help to improve your reaction time as far as the thinking goes. The brain continues to grow and develop in adulthood, but myelination is reduced in some places. So the brain becomes a little bit less efficient with time. And that's just going to be a natural part of the progression. It's going to be more or less depending on how much you use it. But it is going to slowly, again, just kind of be losing some of its efficiency. About 1% of all adults will experience significant brain loss before age 65. And there can be a bunch of different reasons that this can occur. There's 5 big ones that generally are going to be connected to it. One is going to be a TBI, or a traumatic brain injury. And so, get smacked in the head, you've damaged neurons, and it's permanently damaged, basically. It can also technically be caused by like strokes or things like that, which can potentially affect that, right? You have that damage in the brain. Another one's going to be viruses. There are certain diseases that will, in fact, attack certain parts of the brain and damage the neurons. You might just be, again, genetically, you might just have, you got the short end of the stick kind of a thing, where that deterioration will occur a little bit faster and thus have that significant brain loss. Substance abuse definitely affects this, and for multiple reasons depending on the given substance. But generally speaking, if you're abusing any kind of a drug in any way, shape, or form, legal or illegal, doesn't really matter, it is going to cause some damage to your brain. And then another one, this is why exercise and breathing are so important, is poor circulation. Just like if I were to stick a rubber band on my thumb and leave it on my thumb, right, and have it really tight, eventually my thumb would basically wither up and die and possibly fall off, actually, if it was tight enough. Due to lack of blood flow, the brain essentially does the same thing. If your blood flow isn't strong, it starts to wither in places because it's just not getting enough nutrients. It's like not watering a house plant, right? If your brain's the house plant, the oxygen or the blood flow, the first circulation is going to be you watering it. If you don't water it enough, it dies. Same with the brain. Okay. So exercise, breathing, things that get your heart pumping are going to reduce the likelihood of that affecting you, thus increasing the likelihood that you won't experience significant brain loss before the age of 65. Okay. Slide 6. There's an image here on slide 6. You can also find that same image on page 423 on the part called Inside the Brain, looking at neurons that form in adulthood. So in the past 2 decades, scientists have been surprised. So back up just a second. 100 years ago, we thought that basically the brain came to full maturation at around adolescence, which is why Freud said basically at adolescence you're fully mature and there's not really much happening. And then at that point, essentially, there was the argument that our brains just started losing neurons. They bumped it up to 18, then they bumped it up to 25 when they realized that the brain is still maturing at 25. And they felt like, but after 25, basically your brain is set, concrete, and the only way it's got to go is to deteriorate. They've found that that's not the case. Okay. So in the last couple of decades, since the late 90s, early 2000s, they've been discovering different areas of the brain that actually continue to produce new neurons, allowing the brain to basically continue to grow and develop throughout the entire lifespan. Okay. So a specific area of the hippocampus where new neurons settle is the dentate gyrus, a region activated in forming new memories and exploring new places. So the parts of the brain that basically store maps. So if you explore a new area and you kind of, after a couple times of being there, you kind of know your way around. That's going to be connected to the hippocampus, and that's going to be part of the brain that actually creates new neurons. They've also found that certain activities are going to increase the likelihood of building new neurons. One activity that you can do is read on paper. For some reason, our brains don't respond the same reading on a screen as they do reading on paper. Who knows why, right? I mean, we've been reading things like, in nature for a very long time, reading on paper for the last several hundred years, but that's not really long enough, it seemingly, to have any kind of like an evolutionary effect. But it doesn't really matter why. It's true. Reading on paper will increase your brain's neural activity, and increase neuron formation in different parts of the brain. So read regularly. It can be a very big beneficial thing for your brain. Another thing is going to be like juggling and flow art type thing. So crisscross exercises, juggling flow arts like poi and staff spinning and all those kinds of things. Devil sticks or flower sticks, depending on what kind you get. All those things have been found to also increase neuron formation within the brain. They initially thought that the neurons, and actually they did an experiment. They had a bunch of people come in. I think it was 130 in the one experiment that I saw come in, adults all above the age of 25, and they had to learn how to juggle 3 balls, right? And over the course of a month, they did brain scans before they learned it, and then they did brain scans after a month of learning it. And they found that already in the course of a month, there were actually the part of the brain that works with the hand-eye coordination and spatial reasoning increased in size. After a little while, they've looked at people who are really into it, right? Juggle 5 balls or more, and they found that their brain generally increases in size greatly in that area. But it's new neurons. They initially thought maybe that the neurons were just actually like growing themselves, like they were just getting bigger, more connections. That's true, but there's actually additional neurons forming, brand new ones. So that's cool. You can learn how to do that, and that'll help you. YouTube that. You can find all that stuff, how to do that if you want to learn that. So reading, juggling, and flow art type things. Oh, there's some other ones. General exercise is also going to be helpful in neurons, keeping them healthy. Meditation. There you go. That's the third one. Meditation has also been found to increase neuron production in the brain of adults. So just sitting and breathing and focusing, and it can be meditation and or prayer. We've also found that people who pray a lot, oftentimes their brain actually creates new neurons. So there you go. Different interesting things there. Yeah, I think that's everything I had to say about that. So slide 7. Sorry, brain glitch. Brain kind of like wandered off. ADHD moment. The senses, part 1. All of the senses become less acute over time. Again, this gets depressing. The brain compensates for loss in any one area by using other senses. So technology behavior can also help compensate for this. So basically, after 25, give or take, we essentially just are losing everything, right? Sense of hearing becomes less acute, significantly in some cases, depending on what kind of environment you've been in. Sense of taste becomes duller. Sense of smell becomes duller. Sense of touch becomes less acute. Again, less. You have less sensitivity basically. Eyes will begin to fade. We just basically lose all those things. So, slide 8, looking at vision. The senses, part 2, vision, involves 30 distinct brain areas, pretty much all located back here in the back of the brain. Age affects each area in specific ways. Peripheral vision narrows faster than frontal vision. So peripheral vision is that when you put your arms out like this, let's see if I can see it. I can still see it. I can still see it. I can still see it. It's better than I thought it would be. Okay, right about there is the edge of my peripheral vision when I'm looking forward. Okay. This will begin to close in with age, basically. And it has to do with the rods and the cones. The rods are actually going to be the thing that are in charge of peripheral vision. They catch movement and things like that. The rods are going to be the first part that begin to fade. They start to kind of close in. The cones are going to be a little stronger, a little longer, but they also begin to fade, which is why vision gets blurrier with time, or one of the reasons why vision might get blurrier with time. Shape of the lens changes, makes it harder to focus, which also causes that blurriness to occur. Okay. I think everyone's aware of the fact that, eventually you start needing like reading glasses and things. Most people, right? There are some lucky people who can make it into their 60s and still not need any kind of reading glasses or glasses at all. But it's relatively rare. Okay, but that's also the technology that helps, right? Is the glasses and contacts and things like that. That basically help us out to overcome the inadequacies as our eyes slowly lose their abilities. Hearing, since part 3, hearing, slide 9. Hearing is most acute at about age 10. So here's an interesting one. I'll see if I can track down a video of it. YouTube you can find videos where you can basically age your ears, and it plays a certain pitch. It plays a super high pitch, and then it brings it down slowly, and then when it gives an average age for when you should be able to hear a certain sound. So you can see if your ears are on par with your average age. I was questioning about this, how accurate these things really were. When I was 16, I got my first cell phone, and on my cell phone, I downloaded it was like old school gnarly phone, so it was challenging. But anyway, I managed to download a ringtone that was adult proof. It said, and it played this super high pitched, obnoxious sound when I was 16. Well, I found my phone a couple of years back when my oldest son was 4. And I was like, hey, my old cell phone. And I found that ringtone. I was like, I remember this. And I pushed it, and nothing happened. And I was like, oh, it must be broken. And my son goes, what's that annoying sound? Okay. We lose high frequency first with time. And I was like, well, shoot, it means I must be an adult officially. But yeah, so those technically could work. So yeah, but at 10, it was basically, remember, hearing is the most acute at birth, right? It's most developed. We hit our peak at 10, and then it's a slow decline generally, unless you're around like massive noises constantly. It's a slow decline over the course of life. High frequencies are lost earlier than low frequencies. This is also why if you had like, a grandpa who maybe fought in a war or something, he might at some point not be able to hear all the girls in the family, but he can hear the guys okay. And he can't hear the kids, right? Or he can't understand them. That's actually due to the fact that the higher pitch of the voices is harder for them to actually pick up and sense. And so it's more easily scrambled, basically, when they try to perceive what it is that they're hearing, versus like a lower male voice, a full, grown man's voice, is much easier generally for them to hear and perceive. I had my grandfather on my dad's side fought in World War II. He was a miner for a while up in Alaska. He did metal work and stuff all of his life. So by the time he was older, he had hearing aids, which helped, but he would also just turn his hearing aids off sometimes. And yeah, there was nothing there. He could hear men talking to him somewhat if they were close and kind of talking loud, but he couldn't hear ladies to save his life. So, that's why he would. That's terrible, but that's sometimes why he would do it. His wife is talking to him. He's like, anyway. Some nations have laws that require hearing protection for workers, but no laws exist to protect against loud music. An average rock, so the decibel points, right, for average conversations, things like that. If I'm just talking with you, the average decibel points is generally about 60-ish, give or take. If I'm having like a lively conversation with you. Standing on the corner of a busy street, it's about 80, give or take, where it's kind of uncomfortable, noisy. Okay. At 85 decibels, you start to get to the point where your ears are starting to get damaged. Loud music. So if you go to a rock concert, and you sit kind of close to the front, right near the speakers, the average decibel point for a concert, for a big concert, a bigger venue, is about 140 decibels. So, raise your hand if you've ever been in a concert and you come home and you're like, man, I hear that like eep noise. Okay. That eep are actually the hair cells in your ears that basically cause the signal in your brain to pick up and perceive. It's what allows you to sense the sound coming in. That high-pitched squeal sound is actually them dying. They wave in the liquid that's in there. Basically the liquid causes ripples, which causes you to experience sound. If they ripple too much, it's like a forest and too much wind, they start to topple. And when they topple, it sends off a nerve signal, basically, which we perceive as that high-pitched squealy sound. But that's essentially them waving goodbye, never to be recovered again. So if you ever experience that kind of squealy sound in your ears, that eep noise, your hearing is not as good that moment as it was before you did the event that caused that hearing. So, protect your ears. It really is important. I was the nerd in high school and college that would bring cotton when I go to concerts. My friends would make fun of me right up until about halfway through the concert, and they're all like, "Can I borrow some?" Protect your ears. Once they're gone, they're gone. So, 10. Outward appearance, part 1. Skin. Skin becomes drier, rougher, thinner, and less flexible. So it's also why we start getting wrinkles and all those kinds of things. So collagen begins to decrease. Cells just beneath the surface are more variable due to the fact that we're exposed to sun and all the elements and everything, right? It kind of breaks us down more. Wrinkles appear particularly around the eyes, anywhere where you have, like, I get a lot of wrinkles, right? I'm looking forward to when I'm like 80 and my face just is like a giant raisin. But I don't know if looking forward is the right word for that. But anyway, anywhere where basically the skin is creased regularly, such as smile lines and things like that, or frown lines, you end up creating these wrinkles, and they form and stay there. Our faces are exceptionally mobile, and because of that, we have a larger number of wrinkles on the face compared to other parts of our body, usually. Unless you have an exceptionally active tummy or something, I don't know. Hair begins to turn gray and gets thinner, which I have discovered already. Men, testosterone, unfortunately, on one side might cause the beard to show up, but it also causes hair to start falling out on top of your head. It actually changes your immune system, starts reading your hair as a intruder, and so it attacks it. And you start going bald slowly but surely, or in some cases quickly but surely. Or you might get lucky and have the genes where that doesn't happen. But anyway, so yeah. With the decrease in collagen, it decreases approximately 1% every year after the age of 20. So and collagen is basically what allows the skin to have that kind of recovery, that springiness to it. That springiness just kind of fades out. One way to try to counter this is Botox injections, which we have an image here of it. You can also find it on page 425, the same image. In this image, what's her name? I got her, Jennifer Rowe in this picture. She's been getting Botox injections since she was 21 years old. There's about 1 million women who fear the signs of aging, and because of that, choose to go for Botox or, in some cases, plastic surgery to prevent wrinkles from forming. I don't recommend Botox unless it's for actual medical reasons, because Botox is essentially a poison. It does cause things to relax, but it also causes damage in the long run. So take that into consideration if you were considering Botox. Honestly, just age with grace. That's the best thing. Meg Ryan is a good example of that one, right? Anyway, slide 11, outward appearance part 2, shape. Okay, the middle age spread, posture changes, reduced height. Basically, gravity begins to start taking effect upon us more and more in this stage. We've been fighting against gravity all of our life, and then we hit 25-ish, and then the gravity begins to win. There's a tendency for posture to start to shift forward, especially if you're working in a job where you're like in this position all day long. This position will basically start to set in. If you repeat the same position over and over and over again, that position becomes part of kind of just how you are, right? You can counter it by intentionally, putting your chest out and straightening your back up and putting your head back, looking up somewhat, tipping your chin up. Those are things that you can they're simple things you can do to counter that. But there's a bunch of exercises and things like that too to kind of un-Quasimodo yourself if that begins to occur. But that's going to also just naturally occur due to gravity starting to and your body wearing out. Your height will generally shrink. My grandfather on my dad's side was 6'6" when he was a young man, and by the time he passed away, he was closer to 6'3", due to basically his spine just compressing. The discs start losing their sponginess in there, and with that, you have this reduction in height. Interestingly, when he would hang sometimes from his rafters in his garage. And afterwards, one time he did it, and he hung for like 2 minutes, which is actually pretty impressive. He was 80-something years old when he did it. I know young guys who can't hang that long. But he hung there for a couple minutes, and he went in and measured himself, and he was back up to 6'5". He had elongated his spine by 2 inches. But by the end of the day, he'd back down to his normal height. So yeah. Let's see. Muscle atrophy, joint flexibility loss, and stiffness are going to be a case here. It is not a guarantee, though. This is very much a thing of like, if you don't use it, you lose it, right? Little kids are generally pretty flexible. And the reason that they stay flexible for a while is because they stay actively moving through their environments and things like that. if we do the same as adults, we intentionally do things like Pilates or yoga or whatever, just stretching even, we can maintain joint flexibility and reduce the loss and stiffness over time. Now, injuries and stuff are going to add up, right? Like I've broken my knuckles several times in the ring over the years. You hit somebody wrong and something breaks, and so I have a little bit of reduced movement, but at the same time, there are things you can do. Again, small manipulation, pin spinning, and stuff like that can be really good for maintaining, even as arthritis begins to try to settle into hurt joints and things like that. Muscle atrophy, again, is also going to be likely, not guaranteed. You can, in fact, start building muscle later in life from the different research I have seen. It just takes a lot more effort. The tendency is going to be toward weakening rather than strengthening, unless you are actively trying to maintain strength. Okay. But yeah, we also start packing on pounds around the belly, typically, possibly the thighs too. But that middle-age spread is going to be that your body's metabolism begins to slow. So you need to change your eating habits to some extent. You might need to increase mobility, right? I went from when I was 18, be able to literally eat everything I could possibly eat and still hardly gain weight or not gain weight at all, or in some cases even lose weight, which was frustrating. There was a time I did an experiment, and for a week I was exercising really hard. I was lifting weights and I was going for very long hikes with a weight on. When I was eating 8,000 calories a day, and I lost 3 pounds. I was like, that's ridiculous. But anyway, can't do that anymore. I still have to eat a lot, but I don't have to eat that much. But yeah, that's all going to be things to be aware of, right? Agility, reduced strength, agility, and speed are going to be a common factor here the older we get, especially if we're not actively keeping them up, right? I met a man who was 72, I believe. He was a gymnast, though, when he was younger. I think he was 72 when I met him. Anyway, he was a gymnast when he was younger. He was around 70, 75, somewhere in there. That's close enough. He could still do somersaults. He actually could do a flat-footed flip, which is pretty darn impressive. Again, I can't do that. He was a rock climber. He'd climb and he'd put his leg, way up and all this kind of thing. That's actually where I met him, was in rock climbing. And because he stayed active, he maintained his strength, his agility, and his speed. Now, he says that he was, it's one of those, you should have seen me when I was younger kind of things. But he was still able to outperform probably 95% of the guys that I knew that were also in rock climbing and things. So just because it's reduced doesn't mean that it's like that you're just terrible at it anymore, or you have no balance. He also was really good on trampoline. He could do flips and stuff on trampoline and stuff. So yeah, stay active, stay moving, keep flexing, keep stretching those joints, keep yourself busy. Don't just sit as I'm doing right now, right? Okay. Oh, first random fact. Forgot those. Okay, here we go. Let's see. Here's the first random fact. Berries are simple fruits stemming from one flower. What's interesting with this, though, is that with that basic definition of what a berry is, it means that pineapples, bananas, watermelon, pumpkins, and avocados are technically berries by that definition. So there you go. Next time you're eating a pineapple, you're having a nice piece of berry. So yeah, we'll keep going then. Slide 12. Sex and fertility, part 1. We talked about this with the emerging adulthood, right? 18 to 25, you are at your peak sexual potential as far as fertility and everything like that goes. Also, to some extent, your sexual performance. That is going to be your libido and everything is going to generally be strongest at that period, or have the strongest potential at that period, except for like early adolescence as far as the sex drive. So yeah, that's going to be the key there. Sexual responsiveness doesn't go away necessarily. It might slow down a little bit though, right? When I was in high school, I would go and hang out in nursing homes sometimes and spend time with old guys, which was cool. I met a 112-year-old woman one time. She was amazing. But anyway, yeah, she was born in Pueblo. She was 107 actually when I first met her. She passed away when she was 112. She was born in Pueblo. She remembered Pueblo before there was any car. She remembered the first car in Pueblo. So she was only on horses when she was a kid. And before she died in the 90s, she died in the early 2000s. But before she died in the 90s, she got to ride on the Concorde jet, which broke the sound barrier. So she went from nothing but horses to breaking the sound barrier in her lifetime. Amazing, right? But I asked a guy. There was a guy in there, and he made kind of a crude joke, and I was just like, hey, when does like again, I'm in high school, right? Adolescence, sex is kind of on the mind. I'm like, when does this fade? And he goes, I'll let you know when it happens to me, right? He's 92 years old. It still maintains to some extent, right? It's less compared with the older you get, but it's still going to be present. That the desire could still be there. So sexual responsiveness, sexual arousal, and orgasm are still possible generally. Okay. Blood flow and things like that can affect that. But if you remain healthy in general, you can also remain with a healthy sex life. There can be some distress at slower responsiveness. It can take a little bit more to make things happen. But you can still make things happen generally. Emotional satisfaction and physical pleasure are going to be. So here's the interesting thing. As far as sexual ability, your peak is really 18 to 25, or 18 to 22 technically even, is that like it's your peak, right? You'll never be able to participate in sex at such a high level compared to that. But on reports, when people are showing like how satisfied they are with their sex lives, the older you get within adulthood, they actually experience higher levels of satisfaction in their sex lives compared to those younger people. They actually have much higher levels of emotional satisfaction from the sexual experience, as well as more intense physical pleasure. Even though they might not be doing the wild and crazy moves that they were doing when they were 20, the overall experience is superior. So yeah, that's going to be a part of this. And part of the reason for this is actually due to the fact that it's more connected to the emotional. Generally speaking, you found a life partner at this point, and so the person that you're experiencing these sexual acts with, you know them well, and they know you well also. And so you know what each other likes. You're comfortable with each other, and it's more of a bonding experience later in adulthood compared to the just straight up animal-ish thing going. Okay, leave it there. 13, you're like, I don't want to hear about old people sex lives. Anyway, 13, sex and fertility, part 2, infertility. It's most common in nations where medical care is scarce and STIs are common. The tendency also to postpone having children until later 20s at the earliest increases the likelihood of infertility as well. If you kind of got that window there at the beginning of your 20s. If you wait till after that window, you can still have kids generally, but the odds or the chances of having infertility are much higher. 12% of U.S. couples are infertile, partly because many postpone childbearing, again, involving factors that impair physical functioning. So male and female infertility, there's actually be lots of factors. For males, it can be advanced age, right? The older you get, the less fertile you become. The sperm they lose mobility, basically. They start having little weird tweaks and things where their tail doesn't work correctly or things like that. Or they just don't last as long. They kind of fade out earlier. Having high fevers will increase the likelihood of having infertility. If you have a high fever for an extended period of time, it can permanently damage fertility. If you are exposed to radiation in relatively high levels, it doesn't have to be that high. It can decrease fertility. Different drugs, including prescription drugs, can decrease fertility. If the guy is overly stressed, if he is being exposed to different environmental toxins, drug abuse, alcoholism, cigarette smoking, all of these things can reduce your sperm count. It can affect the shape of the sperm, and it can basically just make you less fertile overall. There are things you can do to increase fertility, but those are going to be things that affect it negatively. Female fertility is going to be affected, again, by lots of different things. Oftentimes it can be the actual physical functioning of her body. And so again, if you miss that window of that supreme spot, it's going to be a little bit more likely to have different issues. But other things would be like advanced age, again, disease, any kind of viruses and things can reduce fertility. Smoking, extreme dieting, either too skinny or too fat, can be a fertility killer, basically. And so keeping those in mind. And if that happens while you are developing, like during adolescence, it can permanently make you infertile. Some other issues could be inflammatory, pelvic inflammatory diseases, which can basically close up the fallopian tubes. Kind of like if you have an inflammation in your throat, you can't breathe. If the fallopian tubes get inflamed, they close up and nothing can make it through. Thus, the sperm don't reach the ovum, and you have no fertility. So depending on what the cause is, doctors can help. Often doctors can help overcome infertility. Okay. 14, Sex and Fertility, Part 3. Assisted reproductive technology, or ART, advances in medicine have solved about half of the fertility problems. Again, all these different issues, they can kind of figure out what the issue is and then help to overcome those roadblocks. ART overcomes obstacles such as low sperm count and blocked fallopian tubes. They can bypass it, or if the sperm is low, they can basically, again, bypass it with artificial insemination. And insert the sperm into the woman past those fallopian tubes, possibly, or up into them. In vitro fertilization, or IVF. IVF is a technique in which ova, or egg cells, are surgically removed from a woman and fertilized with sperm in a laboratory. So it's kind of like a petri dish kind of thing. After the original fertilized cells, the zygotes have divided several times. They are inserted into the woman's uterus. So they generally are going to insert several. Because there's a pretty high chance of them not surviving. Even though they've shown life happening outside, they'll insert several with the hope that at least one of them will embed. There are relatively high chances of having twins, two surviving, because they'll insert, like I said, multiple little zygotes. But even then, it doesn't have a real high success rate. Okay. 15, menopause, male and female menopause. So menopause, menstrual periods, cease completely, and production of estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone drops considerably for women specifically. There's a couple things you can do to help deal with this. Hysterectomy can be potentially helpful, or hormone replacement therapy, although it's also known as HRT. There's actually a lot of conflicting research right now on HRT and how effective it actually is, and in some ways actually it increases chances of negative issues occurring more drastically. So it's something to approach with caution. Honestly, one of the best things you can do to make this easy, again, broken record, right? Eat well, exercise, get enough sleep, and basically allow your body to do what it naturally wants to do. The hormone shifts are going to happen, but the negative effects of those hormone shifts will be reduced if your body is at its best potential for that time. Okay. Andropause is the male version of menopause. Basically, is where testosterone levels drop in older men, which normally results in reduction in sexual desire, erections, and muscle mass. Arnold Schwarzenegger has gone through this, right? You go from this beast of a guy to kind of saggy looking. That is andropause's hit. Treatment, there are going to be some different drugs out there like Viagra and Levitra. But just like women, the best way to actually handle this, even more than Viagra and Levitra, is keep yourself healthy. Eat well, exercise well, keep yourself strong. For women and men, actually, both it's important to do. But for men especially, if you want to keep your testosterone levels higher, eat a diet of high iron. And put your body under some serious strain. Lift heavy, and that will be one of the best things you can do to basically increase your testosterone levels or maintain your testosterone levels. If you remain sexually active also through this period, it will increase the likelihood of continuing to remain sexually active later through life. Okay. 16, habits, good and bad, part 1. Exercise. Regular exercise protects against serious ailments, right? You need to move. Strengthens the immune system. Physical and mental health are also influenced by family, friends, and community. The people we surround ourselves with are going to be the people that we generally take on the habits of. So if you surround yourself with people who are physically active, there's a very high chance that you're going to be physically active. If you surround yourself with people who are generally kind of mentally healthy, right? They're not struggling with depression and stuff all the time and talking about sad things all the time. It will help us maintain a happier, healthier mood overall. Not a guarantee, but it can help, basically. Yeah, exercise though, like that. It's one of the very best things you can do for yourself. And it doesn't have to be really ridiculous. You could just be walking, briskly walking for 30 minutes or something, and that really will help. But if you can also include some stretching and some lifting with that, you'll benefit from that much more significantly. 17 habits, good and bad, part 2. Medication in the United States. At least one prescription. So more than half of all 25 to 65-year-olds are on at least one prescription. It's somewhat troubling, right? Because that shows that something health-wise is wrong. And prescriptions can also be for mental conditions such as severe depression or anxiety and things like that, which again, that's something's not right. If and not just in the individual, but if our environment and stuff, if that is at the epidemic levels that it seems to be, this can become didn't seem to be as high as it is today in the past. About half prescriptions for chronic conditions. Antidepressant prescriptions. About 11% of adults are on some kind of an antidepressant. So yeah, this is an issue, right? Let me see I think there's a graph coming up here in a second. Yeah, anyway. For a lot of people, it's needed. But for a lot of people, lifestyle choices are also possibly a factor in the need for it. So there may be some things you can do that would be more of a natural change that would either reduce the need of the medication, right? You might go from needing 10 milligrams to needing 5 milligrams or something like that. And or in a lot of cases actually can remove the need for the prescription altogether. But so it takes a lot of self-exploration though, as well as working with a doctor to kind of figure that out. And so if you have a good doctor that's willing to work with you, it makes it a lot easier versus a doctor who's just like, well, you got this, so here you go, kind of mentality. Okay, 18. Habits, good and bad, part 3. Nicotine. Cigarettes' harm is dose-related, right? You smoke a cigarette a day, it's not good for you, but it's not gonna be all that bad for you either. You smoke 3 packs a day, there's gonna be some negative effects, right? Influences vary by cohort and culture. Tobacco causes more death than any other drug on the planet today, specifically in the form of cigarettes, just because it is the predominant form of tobacco use worldwide, and they add a bunch of other garbage to it to make it even worse. Usage has decreased in the last half century, but in the overall, fewer women quit. So 50 years ago, you had a lot more men smoking than women overall. Women kind of hit their peak of smoking in 1980. By that point, a lot of men were already quitting. By 2014, men and women, about the same number of men and women are smoking today, compared to the vast diversity of significantly more men than women smoking in the past. You can see the graph that's shown here on our little slide here on page 433. And so if you want to take a look at that, you can kind of see the decline. Men went from 16 out of every 100,000 males smoking to about 3 out of every 100,000. Women went from 6 up to close to 7 out of every 100,000, down to about 3 also. So. All right, that's for 35 to 44-year-olds. Also, by the time you hit 35 to 44, there's a tendency to quit, or at least start quitting, because that's usually the time when you start feeling the health effects or the negative health effects of smoking regularly. 19, habits, good and bad, part 4, alcohol. Adults who drink in moderation live longer than abstainers. They've actually found that they're significantly healthier. There are certain alcohols that are healthier than others. The two, interestingly, it seems to be the research is showing that the two healthiest alcohols are red wine and whiskey. Specifically, like the more natural whiskeys. Like you don't want one that has like a bunch of coloring dyes and stuff in it. But there's elements in both those things that basically boost your immune system when done in moderation, and that's the key there, right? So yeah, that really is important. And moderation is going to be different for each person, right? I was a bartender, so I took a lot of training on how much alcohol a person can, how their body's basically. You wouldn't think it would be a lot of training, but I did. I took a lot of training on basically how alcohol affects a person given their body type and gender and how old they are and all these different factors. And what they found was that men generally are gonna be able to consume more, and it would still be healthy compared to women because of body size, because of the hormonal makeup, as well as like muscle mass versus fat and things like that. So for a woman, it might be even like a real healthy level, might be like half a glass of wine or like a half shot. Whereas for the guys, it might be full glass to even a little bit more to a full shot and a half. But it really does depend on the individual. Alcohol abuse shows age, gender, cohort, and cultural differences. The tendency towards alcohol abuse has changed and differed significantly, especially in the United States, or at least in the United States, over the last several decades. There's a tendency today within the younger generation, so specifically millennials, as they've moved into and through this stage, of choosing to either drink more responsibly, not at the abuse level, or to actually completely give up alcohol altogether. You have like mocktail parties and things like that instead of cocktail parties. Part of the reason for this is also there's a tendency towards wanting higher quality, right? So instead of buying a box of Pabst, 24 pack of Pabst, you buy a 6-pack of some craft brew, and it costs the same amount for both of them. And so with that, it's very expensive to be an alcoholic if you're going to do that, right? A good glass of scotch, right? It's going to at $60 a bottle or more, all of a sudden that's going to be more difficult to really abuse. You technically could still do it, but it would cost you a lot more. Low-income nations have more abstainers, right? Alcohol is kind of a luxury item. So if you're poor, there's a tendency to abstain from it because of the fact that it is a luxury item and it can be expensive. But it also is you are more likely to abuse if you choose to drink it. You're using it as basically self-medication to help overcome the stress of life. You're going to have very few much fewer moderate drinkers than from the more affluent nations. So Europe, for example, you have actually the highest amount of alcohol consumption per capita in big chunks of Europe, specifically northern West Europe. But you also have a very low level of abuse, right? They don't drink a lot. They just drink a lot over the course of the year, rather than sitting, like they're not just drinking once a week and drinking like 10 beers at that one time. So, all right, 20 habits, good and bad, part 5, the opioid epidemic. Opioid deaths have increased every year of the past decade, particularly among adults aged 26 to 44. A lot of people think adolescents are going to be the biggest level, right, of drug abusers. But what they found is that, in fact, older you get, to some extent, the higher chances are of abusing it, especially through the middle age period. Generally, during this time, this is when something's going to happen and you do something and you get hurt, and they prescribe you an opioid to basically deal with the pain, and then you get hooked, and then it leads to abusing that substance oftentimes. It's also so I talked about this when we looked at the emerging adulthood, but there's actually kind of a U curve of happiness. And so as we enter into middle age, the closer we get basically from 25 to about 45, 48-ish, that's kind of the lowest point. And as we start to see ourselves declining in happiness, there's a tendency, this is actually the highest point in life for suicides also. Which again, everyone always focuses on adolescence, but this is actually the period where more people are going to choose to end their lives early, prematurely, compared to other points in life. The stresses of life start to build up. Happiness is declining, and you just kind of end up, you're like, yeah, it's not worth it, and you give up. But if you stick it out, you come up the other side. By early 60s, mid 60s, you're back to as happy as you were as 18. So just stick it out. You can make it. It's worth it. You might even be happier than you were at 18 if you had a kind of a rough 18-year-old life. So, okay, 21. Nutrition, part 1. Diet in the United States. So world leader in obesity and diabetes. We typically are the world leaders in things we don't want to be world leaders in. 66% of U.S. adults are overweight. Of those, 33% are obese. Now, this is you got to take this with a grain of salt, right? Doctors might tell you not to, but you need to. No. The methods used to basically to determine our weight, right? The BMI, the body mass index. With that measurement, they don't take into consideration your overall health. They don't take into consideration your activity levels. It just looks at height to weight. So out of that those 33% of U.S. adults being obese, pretty much every NFL player is obese, right? I would say that they are probably other than like head injuries, maybe they're at like peak performance, right? But they're considered obese because their weight, their body weight compared to their height, is that big. Pretty much every NBA basketball player is at least overweight, with a large percentage of them being obese. Okay, you watch the NBA; they do not look obese, right? But a lot of them would be considered obese because of their weight to their height. So take this with a grain of salt. But this part is true. Metabolism decreases by 1/3 between ages 20 and 60. So you burn your calories significantly slower as you age. Increase in obesity rates cannot be blamed on genes, although genes do play a role in it. Cultural influences are a much bigger factor in obesity than genes are. All right. Some people are going to genetically just have higher metabolism, so they're less likely to be obese, and other people's going to have a slower metabolism that's more likely to be obese. But what you choose, the foods that are available to you, the tendencies for exercise and movement, all those kinds of things are going to be a much bigger player in whether or not you become obese or not. Okay. 22. Nutrition, part 2. Consequences of obesity. Excess body fat, no matter what the BMI, increases the risk of almost every chronic disease. You might have heard the phrase like skinny fat, right? Where a person is they look thin on the outside, but they're inside when they look at their organs, they're packed with fat. That person can basically have all of the same negative health effects as somebody who is visibly obese, because around your organs, that's basically where it damages you. It also increases chances of diabetes. Consequences of obesity are psychological as well as physical, right? Just like kids, if our bodies are out of shape, we are connected to our bodies very deeply, right? And so therefore the image that how we kind of perceive ourselves is kind of what shapes our self-image. Okay. So our feeling of how good we are can be very much tied to our bodies as well. 23, correlating income and health. Socioeconomic status. So socioeconomic differences are apparent within every nation. Well-educated, financially secure adults will typically live longer worldwide. Within the United States, the overall risk of dying between ages 25 and 65 is about 15%. Okay. So that's accident, that's heart attack, that's random hiccup things, whatever. Poorest groups is as high as 50% in the United States. So if you look at like the bottom percentage, there's a 50% likelihood of dying before the age of 65 compared to people who are more well off. Overall, the 10 million U.S. residents with the highest socioeconomic outlive by about 30 years the 10 million with the lowest socioeconomic standing. So why? We're not 100% sure. There's some different possibilities. Education being a key factor is probably because of the fact that the higher educated you are, the more likely you are to have learned healthier habits in life, in time management and life choices and the foods you have, things like that. Also, having higher education will oftentimes be connected to higher income. So you have better housing, better medical care, better food, right? You can afford to buy all of the organic foods and things like that. Or you could grow it yourself. But anyway, another part of education could be it's a marker for intelligence. So with higher intelligence, you might actually make better choices just because of the fact that you are intelligent. Not a guarantee. I've met lots of professors that aren't very intelligent. I also met lots of people who have no education that are very intelligent. But that it is a kind of a flag showing you that likely if a person has high education, they are probably more intelligent. Not necessarily, but probably. Okay. So 24, intelligence throughout adulthood. Intelligence is multidirectional, multicultural, multi-contextual, and plastic, right? Lots of ways to measure intelligence. We looked at this, we looked at in middle childhood, right? The different kinds of intelligences and all this kinds of thing. General intelligence, or G, is going to be connected to what IQ tests are looking at. What they found is that intelligence is one basic trait involving all cognitive abilities which people possess in varying amounts. So if you have a higher level of intelligence, you have a higher level overall of the different cognitive abilities available to you. Intelligence cannot be measured directly, but can be inferred from various abilities. So I would have you do something, right? If I wanted to know your spatial intelligence, I would give you some kind of weird puzzle or something and see how you can kind of make it. Maybe I'd give you a bunch of blocks and I'll give you a picture. I'll be like, make this picture with the blocks, and you fill it out with those, right? If I wanted to see how musically intelligent you were, I would introduce you to music, all those kinds of things. And by measuring your abilities or your proficiency in a given thing and the ease of which you learn new things in a given area, I can assess approximately your overall intelligence. So many scientists seek to find one common factor, and there isn't really one. So yeah, I might be able to, I can measure your vocabulary, I can measure your memory, I can measure your reasoning capabilities, all these kinds of things. They've tried to track it down to, like, is it a gene? Is it what happens in your early childhood development? Is it some aspect of health, right? Like man, you avoided these diseases, so therefore you're more intelligent? We don't know, right? We've seen things where a genius comes out of a household of people who are very low on the intelligence scales. We've also seen very intelligent people who have children who are not very intelligent. So genes probably play some role in it, but it's not the only thing. Same with brain development in childhood, like all the experiences you have and things like that. Plays a role in it. It can help, but it doesn't guarantee it by any means. So we don't really know. But in any case, it's going to basically continue to diversify in this age as we move through adulthood. Also, we're going to actually hit our peak intelligence. This is kind of a bummer too. For the general intelligence, where we're looking at specifically vocabulary, memory, and reasoning abilities, you peak out at around 25 to 30. And then those areas generally slowly decline. Now you could remain very sharp with these areas, but if you're not going to be quite as sharp as you were when you were 25, 30. Okay. Which is a bummer. For all of us who are way above 30, it's a bummer. But 25 components of intelligence, part 1. So fluid intelligence. So this is some different ways of judging or looking at intelligence. Fluid intelligence is those types of basic intelligence that make learning of all sorts quick and thorough. Abilities such as working memory, abstract thought, speed of thinking are usually considered aspects of fluid intelligence. It's how quickly can you deal with the environment as the environment is thrown at you. Okay. You can find information on intelligence starting on page 438. So if you want to kind of follow along in the book, that's where we're at. Crystallized intelligence are those types of intellectual ability that reflect accumulated learning. And I think this is where like I've met professors who have a very high level of crystallized intelligence. They are masters in the field that they are in. So things like vocabulary or general information, those are going to be examples of crystallized intelligence, right? They could tell you about the thing that they know extremely well, but their fluid intelligence stinks. right? Their ability to basically deal with the world around them is almost non-existent. And so they, just because you have a high level of one intelligence doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to definitely have a high level of the other. Okay. 26, Sternberg's research in components of intelligence, part 2. Oh, before we go into this, actually, I'm going to give you one more random fact. I keep forgetting to do this. This is a good one. A man named Ronald McDonald robbed a Wendy's in 2005. I think that's funny. But anyway, so yeah, Ronald McDonald robbed Wendy's, 2005. Okay, back to Sternberg. Sternberg's research. Analytic intelligence, so these are different kinds of intelligence. It's valuable in high school and college as students are expected to remember and analyze various ideas. So that's essentially what analytic intelligence is the ability to take in new information and analyze it. Okay, analytic, analyze. It's important, right? Like these really are important pieces. But if you have high levels of it, you might look more intelligent than somebody who has lower levels of it, even if the other people are more intelligent in the other areas. Creative intelligence involves intellectual flexibility and innovation. And then practical intelligence is the intellectual skills used in everyday problem solving. Where are you at? There we go. On page 443, there's a little graph, and it'll also show up here on the next slide. But that way, it looks a little cleaner actually in the book than it does on the slide here in the PowerPoint. So on slide 27, we have components of intelligence, part 3. It's Sternberg's 3 forms of intelligence, and it's kind of the breakdown of them. So you have analytic intelligence, creative intelligence, and practical intelligence, the mental processes that are involved. So I'm not going to read through this. Read through it yourself. You can see what all the individual pieces are. Analytic intelligence, again, is going to be those things that you're going to be using in like a school type of a situation. Certain jobs are also going to need a high level of analytic intelligence, but it's going to be those things that help you with like remembering, your ability to think through things, analyze new information, to learn and really understand something. That is all going to be connected to analytic intelligence. So your ability to like do a multiple choice test or brief essays or recall information, that's all going to be the analytic side of things. Creative intelligence is going to be your originality. It's going to be like your artists, your poets, good writers, you have strong imagination. All those kinds of things are going to be connected to creative intelligence. Top engineers oftentimes are very high in their creative intelligence because it allows them to see things differently than is just expected. So innovation, resourcefulness, ingenuity, those are all going to be things attached to the creative intelligence. Practical intelligence is your ability to adapt to your environment as your environment changes around you. So whatever the world throws at you, your ability to take what it's throwing at you and spin it to work in your favor or as much in your favor as possible. So it's going to be like real world experience, right? Performance in real situations, street smarts and things like that. That's going to be that practical intelligence. So you might have no college education and anything like that, and you could still be high in any of these three. Oftentimes with the practical intelligence, you're going to find it's if you come from kind of a more practical background, you're likely going to develop that way of thinking. Okay. I know a lot of guys who aren't very highly educated, but they have shown very high signs, really in all three of these areas, due to their experiences and choices and things like that, as well as probably just genetic tendencies. Okay, 28, Intelligence in Daily Life, Part 1, Practical Intelligence. Experience advances in practical intelligence, which is needed in adult life. Experience advances practical intelligence, basically, right? The more experience you have, the more practical intelligence you're going to be capable of. And you really can't get practical intelligence without experience. So again, this is going to be kind of a level of mastery of a given skill. Somebody who has a high proficiency in a given skill, they have a lot of practical intelligence usually within that. Practical intelligence cannot be assessed by an abstract test because it's so diverse. There's no way to really pin it down. Practical intelligence is crucial on the job. Probationary periods, internships, and apprentices are common. And this is where you basically are developing those skills to develop your practical intelligence, right? we'll see if you got any kind of natural tendency toward learning it before I let you go, kind of a thing. 29, Intelligence Daily Life, Part 2, Amplifying Intelligence. So cognitive artifacts such as intellectual tools passed down from generation to generation that may assist in learning within societies. This could be just like word of mouth knowledge, right? I'm going to show you how to do this, and that way you have that knowledge. That's a cognitive artifact that's passed down from one generation to the next. So that could be like, hunter-gatherer things. It could be like how to do a specific skill, how to change the oil in your car. All those things could technically be labeled cognitive artifacts. It could also be things like books, different actual tools that we can pass down to continue that knowledge base. But yeah, these are going to have big effects upon immediate and long-term overall performance. We have an image here, and you can find the same images on page 445, but it has a camel herder and a Beijing taxi driver. Both of them have very different skill sets, right? And they're probably really good at what they do. So if I took the camel herder and stuck him in the taxi, though, he'd have no clue what he's doing, right? He wouldn't have Beijing or anything like that. But if I took the Beijing taxi driver, who is hopefully very skilled at what he does, and have him try to herd the camels, he's going to fall flat on his face also, because of the fact that that isn't what he has experience with, right? And so his practical intelligence is very low in that area, which is why it's very hard to measure practical intelligence overall. That difference of what the skill is or whatever. You know when someone has it, but there's no real way of measuring it, right? And usually when you see somebody doing a craft or something and they've reached the level of mastery, they have a very high level of practical intelligence in that area at least. Okay. Random fact number 3. We're going to go ahead and throw this one in here. The longest unbroken alliance in world history is between England and Portugal. They've been allied since 1386, and they are still allied today. 1386. England and Portugal have been allied since 1836 or 1386. Whew. It's a brain glitchy kind of day. Okay. 30. Expert cognition. Culture and context guide us in selecting areas of expertise. Experts are notably more skilled and knowledgeable than the average person about which activities are personally meaningful to them. And again, that's going to be like, so one society is going to hold something in high esteem, and that's generally going to be the things that people, to some extent, will gravitate towards, right? There's a reason why we have a whole bunch of computer programmers today compared to 20 years ago. Experts, or 30 years ago. Okay. Experts are more intuitive, automatic, strategic, and flexible in their chosen field. And that's going to be kind of the level, how you recognize the level of mastery. Once you've reached the level of expert, you make the small adjustments without even thinking about it. And if things go wrong, how you deal with that is oftentimes going to be much more positive compared to somebody who's brand new at it, right? Metalworking is a good one. I like metalworking. It's fun, but it's also an obvious one that when you see a master person do it, and you're like, man, that looks super easy. And then like you try to do it yourself, and you're like, man, I really stink at this. But like something will go a little bit wrong, and you're like, I have no clue how to fix this thing. And a master's like, oh, here, let me take it. And it's fixed, and you're good to go, right? Those kinds of things and I've noticed like with handcraft type things, right? Woodworking, metalworking, carpentry, and things like that. The mastery is much more obvious, even like sculpting or things like that. But things where you're using your hands, the mastery is obvious because they make it look easy. And then you try to do it yourself, you're like, right? Bob Ross was an expert painter. If you ever watch Bob Ross and if you ever try to do a painting along with him, at least for me, my paintings never show up. It'll turn out like his do, right? His paintings are incredible. My wife, on the other hand, she can do it pretty good, but not me. We've tried. I enjoy watching him, though. He makes it look so beautiful and easy. But yeah, that's maybe part of being an expert. 31, becoming an expert, part 1. Expert, someone with specialized skills and knowledge developed around a particular activity or area of specific interest, right? Everyone pretty much knows what an expert is, right? They're a person that has above average skills in a given area. Selective optimization with compensation. So the theory developed by Paul and Margaret Baltes that people try to maintain a balance in their lives by looking for the best way to compensate for physical and cognitive losses, and to become more proficient in activities they can already do well. It's you're building on the skills that you have. As you hit those points where maybe you're physically or mentally limited, right? And or if you've lost certain abilities, like so you're a painter and you start to get arthritis in your hands, so the painting is a little more challenging. It's the tricks that we learn to overcome those issues. It's going to be that selective optimization, right? We're able to compensate for the issues and our weaknesses in order to basically and still achieve the goal that we're going for. And in some cases, even if we have to compensate, right? We have these areas of that we lack. We can actually achieve a higher level of mastery even with those compared to somebody who maybe isn't putting in as much effort, right? Okay, 32. Becoming an expert, part 2. Experts are intuitive. Experts rely on their past experiences and on immediate contexts, and their actions are more intuitive and less stereotypic. They don't go by the book generally, right? So I'm a musician. I love music, and I was playing with a guy who's a jazz musician, and I was asking him kind of like, what was the process. He went from he basically was going down the road of classical musician. And then with that classical training where he had all of the rules memorized, right? He's a composer and things like that. He's like, then you move into jazz where you learn basically where to bend and or break the rules, but it still sounds good. And that is a level of expertise, right? You don't, unless you have the experience, you don't know when you're able to break the rules, when you can deviate from the textbook, if you will. You're not going to, kind of forge your own path when you get to the edge there. Novices follow formal procedure and rules. Experts know where they can bend those rules and or break them, right? They go more by kind of like gut feeling. You're like, but that's not what it says to do. They're like, I know it says not to do that, but you do it anyway, and then it turns out right? Experts are automatic. So experts process incoming information more quickly because of the fact that they have all this knowledge, right? They have all of this stuff built into their brain because of all the experiences they've had. As new information comes in, there's more things to connect that new sensory information with. So they can analyze it more quickly, analyze it more efficiently than non-experts. Then they act in a well-rehearsed way that appears unconscious, because to some extent it actually is. They might be talking to you and carrying on a conversation while they're like working, right? And all of a sudden they have this thing all done. I've seen people shear sheep. I'm not an expert in shearing sheep. There was a guy from New Zealand though that he came out and sheared some of our sheep, and he was talking to us, and literally he would shear an entire sheep in about 5 minutes. It was ridiculous, and the whole time he's doing it, he's still carrying on a conversation like he's not even really, doesn't even seem like he's thinking about it. But he sheared so many sheep over the course of his life that was he didn't have to be thinking about it. It was just automatic. He knew, his body knew what he should be doing. Same with like music, right? Once you achieve mastery of some kind of an instrument, I keep referring back here because my instruments are off here in the corner. At least some of them are. But once you achieve a certain level of mastery, you don't think about it anymore, right? And when you do think about it, it slows you down. Juggling, the same kind of a thing, right? Like any kind of thing that involves some kind of activity is much more obvious. But this can also be even like with history or psychology or science or whatever. You can process new information much more quickly once you've achieved a certain level of expertise. Okay. 33, becoming an expert, part 3. Experts are strategic. Experts have more and better strategies, especially when problems are unexpected. Which is actually somewhat tied to the experts are flexible also. Experts are creative and curious, deliberately experimenting and enjoying the challenge when things do not go according to plan, right? Metalworking, I said, like I was working with a blacksmith for a while. And something would go wrong with me, and I was like, well, shoot, I got nothing. I don't know what happened. I'm not sure why it went wrong. And he would step in and he'd kind of laugh and he'd be like, oh, here, let me fix it. And he like a couple hits and it's fixed. That kind of thing is going to be the processing there, right? That flexibility combined with additional strategies. They know when something goes wrong because they've had it go wrong for them a bunch of times. And so they know how to handle it better. Okay. I can do that with like training horses, right? Like something goes wrong, I'm like, oh, it's because you did this. Like, here, let me help you, and kind of thing. Like that's expertise, right? Expertise in age, 34. Relationship between age and expertise is age and task related. So experienced adults often use selective optimization with compensation in becoming experts. We have lots of years of experience that we can draw from, essentially. The brain adapts as people become experts. There actually is changes, physical changes in the brain as you become experts in a given thing. Depending on what the thing is that, what part of the brain it involves will be the parts of the brain that are physically affected. So there's a picture here, I think, if I remember right. Aha, there we go. Is that the study? Yes, this is a study. So the image, you can find the same image that is on the slide on page 454. It shows a brain scan basically of a person from the top looking down, and you can see there's red spots toward the back and towards the middle portion there. Those places that are more activated. They took a bunch of London taxi drivers, and they took them before they became a certified taxi driver and after they became a certified taxi driver. And part of becoming a certified taxi driver in London is you have to essentially memorize London, the map of London. So they have to tell you, like they'll give you 2 random places, and you have to, as quickly as possible, pinpoint the fastest route from point A to point B. And they'll be like, okay, this road's closed, and you have to come up with a counter route that will bypass that problem and things like that. It's a hard one. It's really difficult to become a London taxi driver. What they found, it takes usually at least a few months of training in order to do it. What they found, and this is the parts of the brain that are lit up here, are the parts of the brain that are associated with our mental maps. And with these London taxi drivers, the portions of the brain that are connected to our mental maps enlarged significantly just over the course of the few months that they were becoming experts in navigating the city of London. So our brains will physically change in order to achieve that. 35, family skills. Recent years, important shifts have occurred that add to this topic. More women are working in occupation traditionally held by men. Like doctors, for example, 30 years ago, about 80% of doctors were men. Today, it's pretty close to 50-50. Domestic work has gained new respect as the guys have to help out with that around the house more. We realize just how hard a lot of the work is, right? Doing dishes and everything like that gets pretty monotonous. It's no longer assumed that a maternal instinct is innate to every mother. Women typically are more caring than men. They're going to be more motherly than men are, right? The emotional side of things, typically. But it's not a guarantee, right? We used to think that there's a maternal instinct, so every woman is like nurturing and wanting to take care of children and things like that. It's not necessarily true, right? Biologically, women have a tendency towards that more than men do, but there also can be very nurturing maternal instinct type things with some guys. But yeah, it's not a guarantee, right? Okay, and then 36. Final slide. Oh, there we go. This was on there. You can also find this image on page 455. U.S. medical school graduates from 1980 compared to 2014, 2015 went from a pretty, again, close to 80% of guys being men to about 75%, I guess, being men to pretty close to 50-50 in 2014, 2015. So, last random fact. After the release of the 1996 film Scream, where an anonymous killer called before murdering his victims, caller ID usage tripled in the U.S. So yeah, the movie Scream caused people to use technology that was already there, but they used it a lot more than they did before. So there you go. That's the chapter in a nutshell. Very big nutshell. It's like a coconut, not just like a little acorn. But let me know if you have any questions. Don't forget to do the quizzes. In the next chapter, we're going to be looking at adulthood still, looking at this age between 25 and 65, but focusing on the psychosocial aspect of it just as normal. So until then, have a wonderful day, night, evening, whatever, morning, and I will see you in the next video looking at chapter 13. We'll see you. Bye.